The bond between a pet and their owner is incredibly special. Many will say that their dogs and cats are like members of their families. And when you're used to bringing your furry friend with you everywhere you go, that bond is even stronger.
Before we begin, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
One sunny afternoon, fisherman Nick Hayworth ventured out onto the Pacific Ocean north of San Diego, California, with his dog Luna. When they finally reached their destination that fateful day, though, Nick suddenly realized his beloved Luna was nowhere to be found. On February 10, 2016, a 20-year-old named Nick Hayworth ventured out onto the Pacific Ocean for a long day of fishing. The weather was perfect, and Nick was confident he'd return home with some great catches. No day of fishing was complete without his dog, Luna, a 1-year-old German shepherd-husky mix. Luna would always venture out onto the seas with Nick. She was a great companion, and Nick loved her dearly. Nick and Luna had sailed about 80 miles off the coast of San Diego, California, near a small island called San Clemente, before things took a dark turn. As he was readying his gear, he realized Luna was no longer on the boat. Panic immediately took over, and Nick began checking every nook and cranny of his boat. He hoped Luna was hiding in a small crevice somewhere, but after several minutes of searching, Nick realized she was gone. Nick began wondering how he hadn't noticed Luna disappear. She was by his side nearly the entire time. The only thing Nick could do at that point was continue his frantic search for his beloved companion. Luna had always been a strong swimmer, but making it back to the San Diego coast would have been too far. Nick prayed that she knew to swim her way toward San Clemente after she fell overboard. Nick radioed the local Coast Guard and Navy and told them what happened. They immediately sent out several boats to help with the search. As optimistic as Nick was, the officials warned him the chances of finding Luna were slim. Nick told officials that Luna had grown up around water, and she went swimming every chance she had. He was confident she had the strength to make it to the shores of San Clemente. Nick was grateful to have the help of the Coast Guard and Navy, but he was still perplexed as to how Luna fell overboard. They had been on countless fishing excursions together, and not once did he ever worry about a situation like this. Because San Clemente housed a naval base, people generally were not allowed to visit. Officials made an exception in this case, however, and Nick was allowed to come ashore to search for Luna. He was sure he'd find her somewhere on the island. Over the next 2 days, Nick traversed the entire island, calling out Luna's name again and again, hoping she would hear him. That was when Nick realized just how unlikely it was that Luna could have survived San Clemente's conditions. El Niño weather patterns meant the island was battered by surf. Nick stayed on San Clemente for 2 more days. He knew he couldn't take advantage of the Navy's generosity, so he was forced to eventually return home without Luna. After a long, emotional week, Luna was considered lost at sea and presumed dead. Everyone close to Nick could clearly see how distraught he was after he returned home. His friend and fishing partner, Connor Lamb, below, said, he was devastated. Would Nick ever get over the loss of Luna? Nick knew he had to accept the fact that he was most likely never going to see Luna again. He took to Facebook to post a few pictures of her to honor the time they spent together. It was Nick's last tribute to his best friend. Still grieving, Nick was forced to return to life as usual. A few weeks after the ordeal, he left town on a trip to Arizona to help clear his head. It was time for him to start rebuilding his world without his companion. Meanwhile, 5 weeks after Luna disappeared, a group of Navy staffers arrived on San Clemente early one morning to begin some routine training. But when they stepped ashore, they were in awe of what they saw sitting on a dirt path in front of them. To their utter disbelief, it was Luna. The sweet pup was wagging her tail and looking at the men eagerly. As soon as they called out to her, she ran right up to them, full of love and affection. According to Melissa Booker, a Navy wildlife biologist who examined Luna after she was found, Luna's coat had camouflaged her so well that crews couldn't spot her. Although Luna was slightly malnourished, she was in good health. She likely survived on small rodents during the 5 weeks she was missing. Because Nick was still in Arizona when he received the call, his friend Connor met the rescuers at San Diego's Coronado Naval Base to pick up Luna. Connor was just as elated by the news, and Nick immediately headed back to San Diego. Shortly after Nick returned home, the two best friends were finally reunited. Nick was in awe that Luna managed to survive for so long on the dangerous island. Even though Luna proved how strong-willed she was, Nick vowed to keep an extra close eye on her when they went fishing together.
If you enjoyed this story, wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds.
Ask most fishermen, and they'll tell you their favorite pastime isn't so much about catching fish as it is about relaxing on the calm waters. But every so often, fishermen can see a lot of action, and the setting can turn from serene to intense fast. One summer, Captain Ben Chansey found himself with something on the end of his line that probably made him wish he was on solid ground. When you see what he pulled from the water, you'll agree, he definitely needed a bigger boat. Catching a fish in the ocean isn't nearly as simple as movies or television might make it look. Fish are a whole lot bigger when you're out at sea, and they're more than willing put up a fight. A boat captain named Ben Chansey learned that firsthand when he was fishing on the open ocean last summer. It was a sunny summer morning. Ben and a few of his friends wanted to make use of the great weather, so they hopped in their boats and headed out to sea. Once they were far enough away from shore, Ben jumped into a flotation device and grabbed his fishing rod. Ben bobbed up and down in the water for several minutes with his fishing line submerged. This particular area was teeming with fish. Ben and his friends had caught some decent-sized fishes there in the past. This time around, Ben suddenly felt a hard pull on his line. That was when his flotation device was actually dragged by whatever had snagged the other end. Ben was no stranger to a good open sea tug-of-war. He was ready to fight. Ben held on tight as the creature twisted this way and that, pulling the small raft back and forth. For a brief moment, he was nervous that he was going to fall overboard, but he maintained his concentration and continued to hold steady. What was this thing? Ben's friend, who was filming the ordeal, panned the camera down to the surface of the water to see if they could determine what the mystery creature was. It was clear something big was lurking down there, but the ripples made it impossible to see clearly. Even Ben wasn't quite sure what it was, and he was floating mere feet above it. The fishing line was still snagged on it, so Ben knew he had a chance to bring it to the surface. Whatever this thing was, it was extremely heavy. Ben just hoped it wasn't dangerous. With all of his might, Ben yanked on the end of his fishing rod. To the shock of all his friends who were watching, Ben pulled the creature close enough to the surface of the water that it started splashing about like a maniac. After 15 brutal minutes of going back and forth with the animal, it finally seemed to be giving in to Ben's tenacity. Ben's rod stopped moving erratically, and the captain slowly brought the mystery beast to the surface. It was a huge Goliath grouper. The exasperated Ben reeled the equally exhausted fish over to his raft and let out a cheer of victory. In this battle of man versus beast, man had clearly come out on top. While it surely took a great amount of courage for Ben to fight such a monstrous fish from such a tiny raft, just a few hundred miles west, a man named George Saber, below, was doing battle with his own monster of the deep. The catch in question took place just off the coast of Corpus Christi, where George was out for a day of fishing on the open ocean. Unlike Ben with his raft, however, George opted to make a kayak his vessel of choice on that fateful day. For George, the fish bit almost immediately. Within the first few minutes, he pulled a number of fish out of the water. He even caught sight of a large turtle as it swam by. The ocean definitely appeared to be quite active on this late afternoon. After catching several large bait fish, George cast out some live bait as he drifted back to shore. With a flick of his wrist, George sent his largest piece of bait out into the murky depths of the water surrounding him. The bait swam around unbothered for a time until George felt a sharp tug at his line. Judging by the feel of the rod, George believed he'd hooked a stingray, nothing he could keep, but a catch nonetheless. He slowly reeled the creature toward his kayak. Bringing the fish closer to his boat, George realized that he hadn't hooked a stingray after all. He had caught a small shark. But before he could bring the little guy on board, George knew he had to wear him out first. Once the shark was good and tired, George lifted him on board so he could take a few pictures with him. Given that the shark was so small, George felt that he would hardly pose much danger. After all, what harm could this little guy really do? Well, as soon as the shark hit the kayak, things took a turn for the worse. The shark thrashed violently and flipped itself toward its captor. Before George could react, the shark lunged at him, nearly taking a chunk out of his feet. The shark gnashed its teeth as it wriggled closer and closer to George, chomping wildly on his seat before deciding that the harsh plastic wasn't worth the bite. But before the shark could make a meal out of his captor, George quickly flipped him back into the water. With his fingers and toes intact, George pulled the shark into the boat one last time. After nabbing the perfect picture, George tossed the shark back into the water, putting an end to what could have been a disastrous day.